Great. Thank you so much. And I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, great. Thank you guys so much for having me. And I'm hopefully going to kind of set the stage for this entire event today, and really talk about why do we have failures in endoscope reprocessing? Why is it so hard to reprocess a scope? And why do we need more solutions? Why do we need to talk about having better workflows, better IFUs or instructions for use? Why do we need to keep talking about this topic? This is such an important topic. And once I get done with my few slides here, if you weren't sure before that this was a very difficult process, then I hope that you are convinced after these next few slides. So I'll jump right into it. So let's first talk about all of the steps that we have to take to reprocess just one scope. So if you work in a location where they're wanting to turn scopes over quickly and very fast, and they want them back really quickly, it's just not possible. And the reason is we have all of these steps that have to be completed, and they have to be completed correctly. So there isn't any hurrying that can be involved in this process. So we have to make sure that pre-cleaning is occurring and it's occurring correctly. And oftentimes, if I'm the one that's in the reprocessing room, I may not have complete control over what's going on at the pre-cleaning. And so that's where someone like myself, an infection preventionist or a leader in the department, really has to pull a team together to make sure all steps are being followed. And this oftentimes is why it fails, because you have to have somebody that's helping pull everything together and tie a nice bow on all of these steps. So, is the pre cleaning happening, and is it happening correctly? So important. If pre cleaning isn't happening, I'm going to show you some photos in a moment. You'll get things that continue to stay inside the lumens of these scopes, and they can stay in there for a really long period of time. You have to do your leak testing, you have to do your manual cleaning, and you have to do them correctly, and you have to do them every single time. A lot of times we do that quality testing after manual cleaning, which I'll talk a lot about in a minute. We do the rinsing, we do the visual inspections. A lot of borescoping is starting to happen, which I'll talk about again in a moment. After that, we either do our high level disinfection or sterilization. Again, a lot of steps happening there. We rinse, we dry. Sometimes we dry in our HLD machine. Sometimes we dry outside. And I'm going to talk about some failures with drying. And then we have to store them. We have to store them correctly in cabinets that actually are compliant. And then we have to make sure we're keeping track of how long we store them. We can't just store them for years and then pull them off the shelf and reuse them. So there's a lot of steps to follow. So if you weren't sure how many steps there were to follow, there's probably some additional smaller steps in here that I'm just skipping because they're smaller, and there's disposable components and things that need to be taken off, and things that need to be have these little micro components that are done. These are just kind of the bigger steps, and this is already enough. So let's talk about those point of use tasks. This is so important, and I have seen this not happen correctly so many times. This happens at the bedside or at the procedure table. So one thing that we oftentimes forget is that proper handling is so important at the bedside. This could also be inside your clinic space. So if you are overseeing clinics, if it's an ENT clinic, an endo clinic, does everybody in that clinic know how to handle a scope? Are they signed off on a competency on how to handle a scope? These scopes can be damaged so easily. And if somebody has never been taught how to handle a scope, they're going to damage the tips of those scopes very easily. And then when they get down to the reprocessing space, they're going to fail the leak test and then have to be sent out for repair. And you're going to add up a lot of unnecessary costs. So again, proper handling, leak testing is so important, because then if it's not leak tested, it could get missed. So all of these steps become very, very important. The point of use treatment, if flushing is required, all of that becomes very important steps. Are those being followed? Is somebody actually observing to make sure that they're done correctly? Are hand washing sinks being used, which they shouldn't be? Are they being used to rinse off scopes, or to do something in a clinic space or somewhere before they get down to the reprocessing space? And then that communication and handoff is really important. And I see this fail a lot as well. Do those scopes sit somewhere and then finally make it to the reprocessing space at the end of the day, after they've just sat there and having things dry on the scope all day long? And then you have to do an extended soak. Do you know what you're going to use for an extended soak? How long you're going to do an extended soak for? What do the IFUs say? Um, is any of this on this slide actually communicated to the reprocessing room when it gets there? And I've seen this done really well, and I've seen it done really poorly. So if you don't have a good communication tool or a way to communicate it all, or even track this, you have to have a good mechanism to do that. There's all kinds of tags and communication handoff tools, but you also have to be prepared to do something about it. Once you get a good way to communicate this, then when you find out you're not making it in the 1 or 2 hours, depending on the IFUs, then you have to make sure that you're ready to put in an action plan to get them to be transported correctly. Then are you removing those single-use items that you have on your scopes? Removing them before you're reprocessing them. And then I highlighted the transport to decon within the time frame, because this can severely back up your department. And whether you're doing this at SPD or a GI reprocessing area, or a private reprocessing area in a clinic space, if you're not getting it there in the time frame and you're having to do an extended soak each time, it's going to back up the space a lot. And a lot of the reprocessing areas in an endoscopy space, it's not set up to have an additional sink to do that extended soak. It's usually a 2 sink area. There's not a third sink to do an extended soak in. So proper workflows and doing it right is imperative. So let's look at this photo really quickly. You can see inside this lumen, there's some kind of glob of something that's been left in there for who knows how many times. So how did we find something like this? We have to use a borescope to find something like this. So if you're using borescopes, if you're not using borescopes, it's a good idea to start using borescopes. Otherwise, you're not going to know what's lurking inside these lumens. You have to have a plan on how often you're going to use them, when you're going to use it, and making sure that you're going back and re-cleaning afterwards. But you also have to have a plan for what happens when I see something. When you see something like this, you can't say, okay, there it is, send it on through, because we can't see something like this and then figure, and just keep using it. So now we need to figure out, how are we going to get this off? What are we going to do? Extended soaking first. What if it doesn't come off then? And talk to the vendors and say, what if we have something in there and we can't get it off? Can we send it to you? What are you going to do? So borescoping is the only way you're going to know if you've got brush bristles that might be stuck in there or something else. So cleaning difficulties can happen, and sometimes you're not going to know unless you're looking inside these lumens. And so borescopes have really opened our eyes up to a lot of issues that we kind of knew were already there. We suspected we were having issues, that we could have things that were kind of getting stuck in there and not coming out. But now that we have borescopes, we can actually see what's happening in there. And drying difficulties, we have been able to see better with borescopes. And we did a study on this. I've put the link in here. I can also put it into the chat when I'm done talking. We did a study with Allsted and Associates about um, how dry is dry after there's a 10-minute drying cycle in your AERs. And we found a lot of droplets that are still in these scopes. So when we think that they're dry coming out of your AERs, they're not that dry. And so this is quite alarming. You can see some of the photos we took with the borescope and the lumens of some of these scopes. And what you see on the blue cards down here is what we blew out with turbulent air onto these cards that caught water. So water and droplets inside these scopes, they can cause bacteria to grow if they sit in there while it's hanging in these cabinets. So this study shows how much water can really still be sitting in these scopes even after that approved 10-minute cycle in these AERs. And so looking at the higher risk endoscope, so as if it wasn't hard enough, what I've already talked about, we look at some of these higher risk endoscopes when you are reading Amy's guidance for ST91. Some of these scopes have reprocessing manuals over 100 pages. So if you want to do it right, you've got to read all 100 pages and make sure you're following all of those IFUs. You have all of these different accessories that you're supposed to use to do it correctly. The brushes that you need to use, different diameters, different lengths. You need a lot of different things to do the cleaning processes correctly for the IFUs. And then the purge volumes, the pre-cleaning and the cleaning, and all of the adapters. So cleaning these scopes and doing them correctly, it is not easy if you are going to follow the IFUs, which we need to. But to do that, it is so difficult, and it's difficult on our techs. And we really need to figure out a better way as an organization, as a profession, to make it easier, but still make it a safe process. So as we move on into the next sections of this webinar, we need to ask ourselves some questions. So we know that the reprocessing procedure is very complex. We need to ask ourselves how many people know how to reprocess just because it's part of their job description, or how many people do we feel like are really competent to do these reprocessing protocols? And how many times do those people have the opportunity to do these complex procedures? And does that make them competent? Are they competent because they got signed off on a competency once, because they did return demonstration once? And then what we worry about a lot is what happens after 4 or 5 o'clock, what happens on the weekends or the holidays, or when the GI reprocessing people leave and it has to be kind of the backup person, or when the one person who's really competent goes on vacation and then the backup person has to come in who really doesn't know what they're doing. Uh, do we let them clean the scope with that 100-page manual? So these processes are so complex, and this is the kind of stuff that keeps me up at night. And I know a lot of other people are thinking about these things when they stay up at night. So there's a lot of things that we need to do better in this realm and on these topics. So this whole webinar speaks to me and speaks to my heart with the things that we need to be better at for the people doing this work, so that we can make sure that our patients are safe. And that is my last slide. And I believe Basil is after me. And hopefully my teammates on this webinar will share some great solutions with us. So thank you all.